Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here's your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning and welcome back to Faith in Our Hometown, our weekly conversation about matters of faith that affect us as people of the greater Joplin area. This morning, I have two very fun guests, two of my colleagues from over at the university, now both retired, one recently and one a little bit longer than that, but two men of great learning, one of history, one of biology. And this morning we're going to be talking about faith and reason and how those things work together. How does our life as people of faith, how does that work with our capacity to reason? And how do we, as people who learn things, and especially who go far in a field in terms of, being experts in their field, how does that, that learning affect their faith? So we're going to be talking about both those things in just a few moments. My guests this morning are going to be Paul Tevereau and Jim Jackson, and we're going to be right back with all of you after this Mercy Minute to talk about faith and reason. So don't go away. Stay tuned.
Once I quit playing football, I still kept up with the eating, the amount of calories I wasn't exercising, so the weight started adding on. Dr. Lou is very knowledgeable in the work he does. He also has a program set up that has support systems in place for you. You'll go through the seminar at first. He'll give you the different examples of surgeries you can have to see which one works best with you. He will also sit down with you and discuss the options, what he feels, but he'll work with you the entire time. Mercy has their gastric bypass program here. They have all kinds of resources and support systems in place. They want to see you succeed, and they're here to help you the entire time, even after the surgery.
Well, again, thank you for joining us this morning for another Sunday morning of Faith in Our Hometown. My guests this morning are Dr. Jim Jackson, a retired professor of biology at Missouri Southern, and Dr. Paul Tevereau, a retired professor of history at Missouri Southern. So, gentlemen, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll start into this connection between faith and reason.
Okay, I got my PhD at Rutgers University, and then I have been teaching at Missouri Southern for about 37 years. And during that time, I've been able to kind of focus in evolution and ecology. And also, most importantly, I've been able to have the ability to work with a bunch of wonderful undergraduate students. I really enjoy the students.
And that's the fun part about higher ed, is just the
really
relationships with all those students.
Yeah.
Paul, how about you?
I've recently retired after 35 years at Missouri Southern. My field's European history, so I've taught maybe a dozen different courses out there, in addition to the U.S. survey. Like Jim, I found one of the most gratifying things in my career at Missouri Southern, working with our students. In addition to teaching, I advised the Model United Nations Club, and also I've coordinated our History Day contest, part of a national competition open to all students grades 6 through 12.
Yeah. Many of our students I know have been over to compete and have fun. They love it, they love it. So, gentlemen, I know you're both men of faith, which is why you were prime candidates for coming on the show this morning to talk about this. But as men of faith, I know, Jim, you practice as a Roman Catholic. For fair warning.
There we go.
And Paul is a member of our Jewish community here, the synagogue here. Correct?
Right. I was raised Jewish. In fact, Ancestry.com says I'm 96% Eastern European Jewish.
Oh,
there you go.
Yeah.
So you come by it honest.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
I've been affiliated with the United Hebrew Congregation of Joplin for more than 25 years.
Cool. Great. Well, it's good to have you both. So the reason why I love having these conversations is because when I was at Southeast Missouri State and teaching, I had lots of interactions with my faculty colleagues, and I loved those because I got to have some fantastic conversations about that intersection between our disciplines and faith. Since I've not been teaching at Southern, since I've been in Joplin, I just do campus ministry. I don't hum as much with the faculty as I used to, but I've had the opportunity to do this in different ways, just in different moments. So I enjoy the conversation about faith and reason and how those places connect. So do you ever find there's a conflict between faith and reason in your own lives?
Well, one of the first conflicts that I noticed was, and when confronting those two ideas, I found that the same terms have different meanings. And I was surprised that both belief and to know have different meanings in a religious context and a scientific context.
Okay, so say a little more about that.
Oh, for example, if you have a belief system in the sciences, you are obligated to reject it if there is evidence that shows that it is not scientifically testable or has been shown not to be so. And alternatively, in a religious context, to adhere to a belief in the face of extreme stress or fear of death even is considered noble. And so a scientist will give up a belief the moment it's proven to be untrue, and a religious person will hang on to a belief because it is of their faith structure without tangible evidence, because that's the nature of faith. And those two are the same. And then also the same way with the word to know. If you know something in the sciences, it is a very transitory sort of thing, always open to adjustment and even rejection. And in the religious context, in general, you know that the birth of Jesus and the virgin birth and all of these sort of things and the nature of the Eucharist are things that you just know, and you don't need testing to even determine whether that is true or not.
Well, but I do think that there is something that in the heart of all, well, at least certainly this religious person, okay, that still wants to test those things to the level that I can. Some things can't be tested. Like, for example, I mean, with all due respect to the philosophers, okay, you can't prove the existence of God. I don't care any of those theorems or proofs or anything, whether it's Thomas Aquinas or St. Anselm or, any of them, any of the great philosophers of old. There's no such thing as a proof for the existence of God. You can't do it. That does come down to something that's faith, and you believe it or you don't, and you can just kind of go with the evidence that you have. So it's the same thing as like saying, I'm in love. Can I prove I'm in love by a scientific matter of doing? No. But do I believe love's real, and do I believe I've been there and am, in my life? Sure. And so again, I look at it as different ways of knowing.
I can, and that's what. Once you understand there's a different way of knowing, then you can be comfortable with this sort of dichotomy. And back to the existence of God and that sort of thing. If a scientist ever says that they have any evidence for or against the existence of God, they are being naive, and they really are entering an area that is not even in the realm of science to test. The same is true with whether miracles occur, the miraculous events of the birth of Jesus. These are not testable at all, and it is naive for a scientist to do that. And I think that is an understanding that most people in the sciences have to come to grip with sometimes. There are just things that are out of the realm, the paradigm of science to deal with.
How about you, Paul? Is there anything there in that interplay between faith and reason that gives you moments of pause?
Yes, as I was listening to you and Jim, a couple of things occurred to me. On the one hand, for me as a Jew, I think my Jewish upbringing in part explains my choice of career. I don't think you can be Jewish without taking history seriously. I may be overgeneralizing, but if you look at the ancient world, one of the things I think that makes the Jews stand out is their Bible, which assumes that things change over time. It's not like, to bring up a song from Jim and my time, Joni Mitchell's The Circle Game, where everything goes round and round. There are distinct moments of time, such as God's covenant with Abraham, such as the revelation at Sinai, such as the destruction of the temple and then the return from exile, where everything changes. And I think, for me anyway, being brought up in that Jewish environment gave me an interest in history. On the other hand, there is a fundamental tension, because for most of the things in the Torah, for most of the things in the Hebrew Bible, there's no corroborating evidence, and the historian always looks for corroboration. So whether we're looking at the patriarchs, whether we're looking at the central event, the Exodus from Egypt, not all of them, but for maybe the most crucial of them, there's no evidence that I would use as a historian that would assure me they really happened the way they're recounted in the Bible.
Now, does that cause any tension for you? Because, like, for example, I think a lot of people just say, we found this little piece in history that seems to indicate this, or we found this piece in history that seems to indicate that. Does that cause you any distress as a person of faith?
Sometimes it does. Now, on the one hand, it's not surprising. I mean, the Bible itself says that God picked what on the face of it was not a particularly remarkable man who was going to establish a nation that for a time became a respectable second-rate regional power, but no more.
Yeah.
And so in that respect, it's not surprising we don't have corroborating evidence in the same way we do for, say, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, or the Romans.
Right.
But on the other hand, yes, it is a challenge in that things we do, things we believe, are supposed to hinge on events that, subject to the same level of scrutiny that I'd give any other historical event, we can't prove happened.
So how, as a person of faith and reason, does not the reason sometimes conflict with you and it makes you want to walk away from the faith? Or how does that work for you?
Well, sometimes I actually have sort of abandoned reason and chosen to go with faith because of the teachings of my church. Abortion is one of those things. I really don't fully believe that right after conception, what we have there is a human. But my church, in greater wisdom of the spirituality, says, indeed that is, and that is how I should respect that. And so because of that, I think that I've chosen to take sort of a radical approach to life in that case, and consider that a human being from the point of conception. That's a difficult thing.
It's an interesting, and I see, of course, and I'd only tweak that a little bit by saying, we believe it's human. We believe the only thing it lacks is growth and development before it becomes a person. Mm-hmm. Now, I know people can fudge on when is it really a person, but we don't want to take the chance that it might be. And so because of that, but can you at least as a person of reason say that from the very beginning that you know that it's at least human even if you don't know that it's a person?
I don't have enough.
I'm surprised we've never had this conversation before, but that's okay.
I don't have enough meaningful information to answer that question.
Right.
But I am concerned with the lack of the church's understanding on the other end of the spectrum about we should fight harder for against the death penalty, because there is a taking of life equally or greater possibly because of denying salvation to an individual.
Right.
And then also end of life issues come around there. When do you cease nourishment and that sort of thing with the concept of the ultimate sanctity of life? Those are very difficult
and those
questions.
Are huge questions. Now we're going to have to pause here for a second because we're going to have to take a quick break. But this is Faith in Our Hometown. Don't go away. We're going to be right back with those questions hanging in the air.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
I would be surprised if any of you flipped the channel after that little, little right before we got to the break here. My guests this morning again, Dr. Jim Jackson, Dr. Paul Tevereau, both retired from Missouri Southern as longtime professors, both over 30 years, 35, 37 years of faithful teaching. And we were talking about the connection between science and or faith and reason. Which as a scientist, as an historian, within that context, and we were just talking about some specific things in terms of. Now, I do think you were talking about that we don't fight as much for some of those things, and I believe we do fight as much. I think that just in Catholic circles, we've won the argument with most of our Catholics on the abortion issue, where we haven't won the argument yet with a lot of our believers when it comes to, for example, the sanctity of life when it comes to the death penalty and those kinds of things.
So there's a dichotomy in the church between the teachings of the church and the beliefs of the people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think there always are sometimes,
Yeah.
in terms of that, because the popular wisdom, although we are growing, even here in the state of Missouri, we're doing better when we poll even the Catholics and we, about what they believe. We're making progress on that issue, that they're beginning to understand the sanctity of life, even for somebody on death row, even for a hardened criminal, somebody who's committed murder or some atrocities against humanity or society, and especially those individuals. But they just haven't been believing as much. We've been preaching it, but they haven't been agreeing with us.
Yeah.
They do agree with us for the most part on the whole abortion issue, which is interesting.
Measured in geologic time as the church.
Well, let's say it takes a long time to move a group that big, But Paul, you were talking a little bit earlier about, some of that conflict for you as a member of the Jewish faith. Do you find the same thing, that sometimes that you're like, say, the rabbis and some of the ones who teach, sometimes are, coming into a little bit of conflict with the believers?
I often find that. Let me give one example that, as some of your viewers may know, our Torah is divided up, so each week we do a portion of the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, such that in a calendar year you go from the beginning of Genesis to the end of Deuteronomy.
Right.
The portion that will begin this coming Sabbath, very near the beginning, it says how we're supposed to destroy the altars, religious shrines of the non-Jews living in Canaan. I don't think there's any Jew today, at least no Jews I know, who wouldn't feel uncomfortable with that. So what do we do with that?
So you're not coming over to St. Peter's to get us?
Yeah.
That's just it.
That's
just it.
Okay.
If how can we live in a pluralistic society but still be guided by the Torah? And at least one commentary I read this week said, okay, way back when, 3,000 years ago or more, these were people who were very insecure in their faith. Maybe that's the only way they could deal with it. I think we're secure enough in our way and our faith now not to be challenged by people who hold different beliefs. As Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth, said, we can recognize the dignity of difference, that God in his wisdom has decided not to make all people conform to the same beliefs, and that we can recognize the common bond of humanity that unites people of different faiths. And I think you can just as easily get that from the lessons of our Torah or our sacred books as you can that one uncomfortable incident in Deuteronomy.
And I think this is something that all people who follow scriptures, and I'm gonna say this especially for our Western triad of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, okay? So when we look at that Western triad, I think that all Jews, Christians, and Muslims struggle from time to time with how to interpret that word, especially when the word seems to be in great defense of what we believe versus how other people have come to see, ultimate reality. That's a challenge for everyone because, again, people say, sometimes my, students are. I got in a fight with one of my friends a few weeks ago in St. Louis over this very thing, when one of them was saying, well, the Muslim scriptures are much more violent than the Christian scriptures, and I'm like, well, no, not when we consider we got to take the Jewish scriptures along with the Christian scriptures, yes, there are a few violent moments in there. There are a few violent attitudes. Let us bash, our children's heads against the rocks. Okay, the heads of our children's enemies against the rocks. Well, yeah, it says that. And we claim that as part of our scriptures, but do we go out and do it? I would hope not.
So with this then advanced look in these years, then does the Catholic Church recognize that salvation is equally available with the Muslim tradition and the Jewish tradition as well as the Christian religion?
Well, it's an interesting, and this is dogma. So I know the Catholic Center will get calls on this because there are going to be Catholics out there who are questioning but you paid good money for my education,
Yeah,
so I'm
right.
going to give you I'm going to give you what we teach.
And
now.
that's why I brought it up.
Thank you. There you go. Well, but at any rate, what we did was we said, of course, that and this is any religion, and I don't care what religion you follow. If you don't think it's got the truth, well, then why would you be following it? Why would you do it? Whether you're Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever it happens to be, either you think you've got something that's propelling you forward in a particular way, or you ought to be doing something different. Why would you adhere to anything that you thought was really just completely off base or wrong?
Yeah.
Okay? And so all of us believe we have the truth. So what this is the actual, the teaching of the church, and we say it in a very specific way because what we say is we believe that truth subsists in the Catholic Church, okay? But we recognize that there are elements of truth in other faiths and other religions. So that's been dogma for about 60 years now.
Oh, really?
Probably a little longer, okay? So in that context, okay, so what we really say is, yes, we think we've got the closest thing to the truth, but then from there we start looking at all of our neighbors, all right?
Yeah.
So we got the most in common with our Jewish brothers and sisters because that's what Jesus was and that's what we started out. And then we go to our Muslim brothers and sisters, because again, they're children of the book and we're connected, all right? And then there are other folks out there who believe in God, but it may be God in a completely different way. And so we can believe some of those good things. And then there are even non-theistic religions, okay, which are forms of Buddhism, et cetera, that maybe people of good will, that we can still find things to connect with each other on. But what we basically say is we believe we got the closest thing to the truth, but those other religions may have elements of truth that we can connect with or support. And that's really, in some ways, what we're encouraged to do is to reach out across the table, if you will, and figure out how can we connect, how can we be, support one another, even if we happen to disagree on how we'd organize it, if we happen to disagree on what would the scriptures be, even if we happen to disagree on some of the conclusions that we would come to, how can we still do that with other people and still manage to do that? Now, again, that's not saying that, that I don't want to challenge the Catholic, some of the older folks out there have got a different understanding, but that really is what we teach, and I teach it all the time, but, somebody say, but no, the Catholic Church is the one true religion, and I'm like, well, okay, you can get that, and I don't have any problem with that in that context, but I'm not starting with that when I go to have these kind of conversations because why wouldn't I rather connect on these other levels? Yeah, you know what I believe, basically, and I know what you believe, basically. But we both believe it. Why am I going to try to beat you over the head and get you to say you're wrong when you believe what you believe? Let's share faith and figure out how we can connect. And
discover truth.
And discover some truth as we're going along.
That's a good way
So
of
that's
putting it,
how we do it.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know other people will look at me and go, "Oh, you poor dumb Catholic, you just don't get it." And I get that. And for you viewers out there, I'm not trying to mess with your faith. Really, I'm not. But what I am saying is that we got some intelligent people around this table who believe some different things. You got two Catholics, so you're going to have two different opinions on some things because, and neither one of us are the official teachers of the church.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bishops do that. But we all have to figure out how we're going to do some of those things and continue living with each other around here. But we can do that as people of reason and as people of faith. And we're going to have to make our way along the journey somehow.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Jay. And you remind me of a passage from the Ethics of the Fathers, one of the oldest post-biblical Jewish writings, where it says, all Israel has a place in the world to come, whatever that is. But then it says right after that, the righteous of all nations have a place in the world to come.
Oh, yeah.
And again, that's a very biblical thought because even going back to Abraham, who you made reference to earlier, and his brother, both sons. So Isaac and his brother, Esau, there are connections there, and both sets of scriptures say, and they'll both become the fathers of great nations. Well, what do we have? Now I know this is just a biblical, trace on the whole thing, but what do we have there other than all of Christianity and all of Judaism and all of Islam right there together, which is why we refer to them, as cousins, because really at our greatest roots, we are cousins, which is, again, a bit of a challenge. So we continue to try to do some of that stuff. So what are the challenges? We got just a little bit of time left. I mean, I know we can't launch into anything big, but what do we got in terms of faith and reason?
I had a bit of a challenge recently because my area of research is ecology. And also recently the Pope brought out a encyclical called Laudato Si,
right?
Yes. And so
he's still in a lot of trouble for that. People don't like what he had to say.
Well, yeah, and the challenge for me as an ecologist was it made me have to be and think personally as far as my actions, as far as what I research. And that means that I had to think about ecology not only the basis of a prairie restoration, but the need for pure water for the poor people. The idea, he challenged us to say that the free enterprise and capitalistic system was not as conducive to saving our planet as it is thought to be.
Well, but what he was saying is that capitalism, unfettered, can work against the goodness that comes from it. Guys, we are running out of time. I would love to continue this conversation, but it all gets back to that reverence for all of creation, because God made the whole thing and saw that it was good and is going to do the whole thing. So we've got faith and reason comes back here. So we'll be right back after this Mercy Minute to wrap up.
The SANE program, or Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program, is a program established to provide a coordinated, specialized care to patients or women or men who've been the victim of sexual assault.
The SANE program is really designed to be a collaborative community response to sexual assault.
It's really important to make sure that it's not just the report or the forensic, but they get all of the testing that might be needed for their health.
It's also important to know that you don't need to know if you want to press charges or not. We don't get law enforcement involved unless you request it.
I just want to express to the victim that it is never your fault. You always have the right to say no, and that it's your body. So if you say yes one time, it doesn't mean every time.
I think it's important that sexual assault victims remember they've been victims of a crime, and crime victims do not pay for those services.
Well, first of all, I want to make an apology to all of our all of our viewers, because we just scratched the surface this morning on this whole topic of faith and reason. And so I'm going to make an invitation to these gentlemen after we get off the air, if they want to come back and let's talk some more. I think it'd be fun. But we're talking about how if you're a person of faith, reason has to kind of connect with who you are as a person of faith. And if you're a person of reason, a person of learning, then you got to figure out how to connect that as a person of faith. These things intermix with one another, and at the same time help us, push us forward in ways that I hope makes us better both learners and teachers, and also men and women of faith. And that was the excitement of today. So join us again next week for Faith in Our Hometown. It's been great to have you with us this morning, and I hope this gives you something to think about this week. God bless.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.